Last match. Chapter 1. Michael could not believe his ears. The clatter of cutlery and the murmur of conversations in the bustling cafeteria faded into a dull hum as his attention sharpened on the voices behind him. Two women, their laughter light and carefree, were discussing something that had just sent a jolt through him. He had been nursing a lukewarm coffee, lost in the usual labyrinth of his thoughts, the endless schemes, the precarious balance of his father's illicit empire, and his own desperate yearning for an escape. They had settled into a booth, ordered their drinks, and almost immediately their animated chatter had begun. It was the kind of casual, intimate conversation that people have when they feel utterly unobserved. Michael, however, was a master of observation, a skill honed by years of navigating treacherous waters. He caught snippets, then phrases, and finally the full astonishing revelation. "I can't believe that Sarah always guesses the World Cup final match results correctly," one exclaimed, a note of exasperated admiration in her voice. The other, whom Michael would soon learn was Dora, laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Yes, I know, she always does, and she posts it on Instagram and we all laugh about it, but in the end she's right, every single time. She says God gives her the answer. God gives her the answer." The words echoed in Michael's mind, reverberating with an almost divine resonance. God. The very concept was a distant, almost mythical notion in his world, a world of cold calculations, ruthless power plays, and the brutal reality of a drug cartel. Yet here was a tangible, repeatable manifestation of divine intervention, and it was tied to the one thing that consumed his waking hours, the World Cup. For Michael, the World Cup wasn't just a game. It was his ticket to freedom, his grand gamble against a life he despised. His heart, usually a stoic drumbeat of ambition and fear, quickened. This was it. This was the answer to his prayers, if indeed such a thing as prayer, or a God who answered them, truly existed. He had always scoffed at faith, seeing it as a crutch for the weak, a delusion for the desperate. But now, a flicker of something akin to hope ignited within him. A hope that smelled faintly of desperation, but hope nonetheless. With a practiced nonchalance, Michael rose from his seat. He walked to the barista, his movements fluid and unhurried, masking the frantic calculations churning in his mind. He ordered 3 drinks, 2 for the unsuspecting women, 1 for himself as a prop. Carrying the tray with a deceptive ease, he approached their table. "Hello, ladies," he began, his voice smooth, his smile, he hoped, disarmingly charming. I've just been stood up by my date, and I couldn't help but notice you 2 beautiful women. I hope you don't mind if I buy you drinks?" It was a line he had used countless times, a well-worn script for charming his way into conversations, for extracting information. The women looked up, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and mild amusement. But Michael beamed, his charisma a potent weapon, and placed the drinks on their table. "I'm just trying to be nice," he added, a hint of vulnerability in his tone. They nodded, a slight softening in their gazes. He extended his hand to the first girl. "My name is Michael. What's your name?" "Dora," she replied, her hand delicate in his. Dora," he mused, feigning recognition. "Why do you look so familiar?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air, a hook for her curiosity. "Why, I don't know," replied Dora. "Do you have a sister called Sarah?" Dora's eyes widened slightly. Yes, Sarah Adetunji." The name spoken aloud confirmed his wildest hopes. Sarah Adetunji, the prophetess of the World Cup. "Ah, Sarah Adetunji," Michael exclaimed as if a great mystery had been solved. "Have you met her before?" asked Dora. "Ah, I don't. It was just a brief meeting at a party sometime," he lied smoothly, his eyes holding hers. She was so beautiful, she has such a captivating beauty, and you radiate that same beauty, and I remembered her for it. But no, it was just that one meeting. Okay, say hi to her for me." He then turned to the other lady, extending his hand. "Michael." "Oh, Nancy," the other lady giggled, clearly flattered by his attention. "Pleasure to meet you both. Well, I hope you enjoy your drinks. I really didn't want to bother you, but I couldn't let such beautiful ladies go unattended." The 2 women smiled gratefully, their initial skepticism replaced by a pleasant surprise. Michael nodded, a silent acknowledgement of his small victory, and made his way out of the cafeteria, his mind already racing, plotting his next move with the precision of a chess grandmaster. The game had begun. Bookmark, Vivacious. Chapter 2. Michael slid into the plush leather seat of his customized SUV, the hum of the engine a familiar comfort. The cafeteria, now a mere speck in his rearview mirror, held the key to his future. He watched as Dora and Nancy emerged, their laughter echoing faintly even through the tinted windows. They climbed into a sleek sedan, Nancy taking the wheel. Michael allowed a few cars to pass, creating a natural buffer before he smoothly pulled out, maintaining a discreet distance. He was a shadow, an unseen presence, his eyes fixed on their taillights. His mind was a whirlwind of calculations. This wasn't just about money, it was about liberation. His father, a man whose name struck fear into the hearts of many in Lagos, had carved out an empire built on blood and illicit trade. Michael was trapped, a gilded cage of luxury and violence. He yearned for a life beyond the cartel, a life where his hands weren't stained by his father's sins. The World Cup, with its colossal betting pools, was his only viable exit strategy. He had gambled before, winning enough to sustain his lavish lifestyle, but never enough to truly break free. Sarah Adetunji, the woman who claimed God whispered the winners to her, was his last, best hope. The sedan eventually turned into a quiet, tree-lined street, pulling up to a modest yet well-maintained house. Michael slowed, feigning interest in a roadside vendor, his gaze unwavering. He watched Dora alight, wave goodbye to Nancy, and disappear behind the ornate gate. He committed every detail to memory, the house number, the color of the gate, the subtle security features. His mind, a complex web of strategies, immediately began to construct the next steps. He would need to observe Sarah's routine, identify her vulnerabilities, and assemble a team that could execute the abduction flawlessly, leaving no trace back to him or his father. This wasn't a spontaneous act. It was a meticulously planned operation, a chess game where every move was calculated. He nodded, a grim satisfaction settling over him. The first phase of his audacious plan was complete. Now, the real work began. He would orchestrate this with the precision of a surgeon, leaving no trace, no room for error. Sarah Adetunji was about to become his unwitting partner in destiny. Bookmark H1C Arc, Chapter 3. Sarah hummed a joyful tune as she walked, the plastic bag swinging lightly in her hand. The morning sun, warm and gentle, kissed her skin, and the vibrant sounds of Lagos filled the air. She was on her way to the market, a spring in her step, her heart light. Today, she was making goat meat pepper soup for her parents, a special request they had made, and she found immense joy in serving them. It was a simple pleasure, but in her world filled with faith and gratitude, every moment was a gift. Her thoughts drifted to the upcoming World Cup, a source of playful banter among her friends and family. It was true, she often had an uncanny knack for predicting the winners. It wasn't a skill she cultivated, nor one she boasted about. It was, as she often told Dora, a quiet whisper from God, a small, delightful secret shared between her and her creator. She would post her predictions on Instagram, a private joke among her 20 followers, never imagining it would draw the attention of anyone beyond her immediate circle. Suddenly, the serene morning shattered. A dark van, seemingly appearing from nowhere, screeched to a halt beside her. Before she could even register the danger, the side door slid open, and strong hands grabbed her, pulling her roughly inside. A coarse cloth was clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream, and a bag was thrown over her head, plunging her into immediate darkness. The world, which moments ago had been vibrant and full of life, dissolved into a terrifying void. The van sped off, tires squealing, leaving her disoriented and terrified. She struggled, her heart pounding against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, but the grip was too firm, the darkness too absolute. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her usual calm, threatening to consume her. Lord, help me, she prayed silently, desperately, clinging to the only constant she knew. Even in the throes of terror, her faith was an anchor, a tiny flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness. The ride was a blur of sharp turns and sudden stops, a dizzying dance of terror. She estimated they had been driving for at least half an hour when the van finally jolted to an abrupt halt. She was yanked out, still blindfolded, and rushed into what felt like a building. The bag was finally removed, and her eyes, blinking against the sudden light, struggled to adjust. She found herself in an unfamiliar room, flanked by two imposing men. They were tall, muscular, their faces etched with a grim, almost sinister indifference. "We will wait here," one of them grunted, his voice devoid of emotion. Sarah's breath hitched. She looked from one to the other, her mind racing, trying to comprehend the nightmare she had stumbled into. Why? Who are these men? A few minutes later, a new figure emerged, descending a grand staircase with an air of calculated authority. He was tall, dark, and undeniably handsome, but his eyes held a cold, assessing gaze that sent a shiver down her spine. "Is this her?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost silken, a stark contrast to the brutality of her abduction. The men nodded. "Very good, you may go." The two imposing figures melted away, leaving Sarah alone with this enigmatic man. He took her arm, his touch firm but not unkind, and led her to a chair. "Sit here," he commanded, his voice now softer, almost gentle. He closed the door behind him, then walked back to the two men. Sarah could hear snippets of their conversation, hushed but firm. "I don't want a word of this to my father. Do you understand?" Michael's voice, she now knew, was laced with an underlying threat. "Go back to your old post, but not a word of this to my father." The men nodded, their obedience absolute. Sarah sat, trembling slightly, her mind reeling. His father? A secret? What kind of world had she been dragged into? Yet, even in her fear, a quiet resolve began to form. She would not break. Her faith was her shield, her strength. She would trust that God, who knew even the sparrows, was watching over her. She had to believe it. She had no other choice. She was a captive, but her spirit remained free. This was a test, she decided, a trial of her faith, and she would face it with the same quiet courage she faced every day. She would not give in to despair. Not yet. Not ever. She would pray, and she would wait, for God always had a plan, even in the darkest of moments, especially in the darkest of moments. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and began to pray. Chapter 4. A few hours later, the door creaked open and the tall, handsome man Michael re-entered, carrying a tray laden with food. The aroma of a rich stew and freshly baked bread wafted through the room, a stark contrast to the fear that still clung to Sarah. He placed the tray on the floor, a small, almost apologetic gesture. "You must be hungry by now," he said, his voice a low rumble. He watched her, his gaze intense, assessing. Sarah, despite her fear, met his eyes with a defiance she didn't know she possessed. Her stomach churned, but it was more from anxiety than hunger. "Why?" she finally managed, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "What do you want from me? Why did you kidnap me?" Michael studied her for a long moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Why do people kidnap people?" he mused, almost to himself. "I don't know. Ask for ransom?" He shook his head, a faint, humorless smile playing on his lips. "You are my ransom." "What?" Sarah whispered, her lips trembling, her body shaking with a mixture of fear and disbelief. This was not making any sense. She was no one of importance, no heiress to a fortune. What could she possibly offer as ransom? "I heard that you are good at predicting the winner of the World Cup, right?" he continued, his voice losing its earlier softness, becoming sharper, more demanding. "I checked it out. I saw your Instagram post and you've been right for the last 3 times. So, you're gonna tell me who's gonna win the World Cup this year?" Sarah stared at him, dumbfounded. Of all the reasons she could have imagined for her abduction, this was not one of them. A World Cup prediction? It was absurd, yet terrifyingly real. "It doesn't work that way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How does it work?" he pressed, a hint of impatience creeping into his tone. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. It only happens when God reveals it to me, and when he does, I post it. It's just me and my friends. We laugh about it. I only have 20 Instagram followers. It's not like everybody knows about it. It's just my friends and my family, all 20 people that are following me on Instagram." Michael's smile widened, a predatory glint in his eyes. "Well, I make 21 then, and this 21st follower is telling you, you'll be here with me until God reveals it to you." His words were a cold, hard promise, a chilling declaration of her new reality. He was not asking, he was stating a fact. Sarah felt a wave of despair wash over her. How could she explain the inexplicable? How could she force a divine revelation? This man, with his worldly ambitions and his desperate gamble, could not possibly understand the quiet spiritual nature of her gift. It was not a tap she could turn on and off at will. It was a grace, a whisper, a gentle nudge from the Almighty. "I'm not hungry," she said, pushing the tray away, her appetite completely gone. "Well, I'll leave the tray here," he replied, his tone indifferent. "I'll come get it in the morning. If you don't eat, that's your headache." With that, he turned and left, closing the door with a soft click that echoed like a final, definitive sentence. Sarah was alone again, left with the cold food, the chilling reality of her captivity, and the daunting task of waiting for a divine message on demand. She sank back into the chair, her eyes fixed on the closed door, a silent prayer forming on her lips. "Lord, what is happening? What do you want me to do?" Chapter 5. Morning after morning, Michael found himself in the unexpected role of Sarah's captor and caretaker. He served her breakfast, lunch, and dinner, always on a tray, always with a careful distance. At night, he would lay out a mattress, a pillow, and a blanket, ensuring her basic needs were met even as he held her against her will. He had expected defiance, tears, perhaps even desperate pleas. What he found instead was an unwavering, almost unsettling joy. Every day as he opened the door to her room, he was met not with despair, but with song. Sarah was always singing, her voice clear and resonant, filling the small room with melodies of hope and praise. "I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I am free," she would often begin, her eyes bright, her spirit undimmed. "His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he's watching over me." These were the words of a song she sang on the 5th day of her captivity, a song that grated against Michael's cynical worldview. He smirked, leaning against the doorframe, a tray in his hand. "You're free?" he challenged, a mocking tone in his voice. "I don't think you're free." He gestured around the confined space, the locked door, the absence of any escape. How could she speak of freedom in such a cage? Sarah looked back at him, her joy-filled eyes glinting not with fear, but with a quiet pride. "I am free," she declared, her voice firm. "Jesus makes me free, no matter what." Her conviction was palpable, a force that seemed to push back against the very walls of her prison. Michael scoffed, a short, almost involuntary laugh escaping him. "Jesus makes you free?" he repeated, the absurdity of it striking him. "Yes, you're the one that is captive, held captive, not me." He was the one in control, the one with the power. She was the one imprisoned. The irony, he thought, was lost on her. "How so?" he asked, enjoying the unexpected turn of their conversation. It was a diversion from the relentless pressure of his own life, a puzzle to unravel. He was a man who dealt in tangible realities, in power and influence. This talk of spiritual freedom was alien, yet strangely compelling. Sarah's gaze softened, a hint of compassion entering her eyes. "You're held captive by sin and Satan," she explained, her voice gentle but unwavering. "You're a slave to sin, and you're doing the will of the devil. You have not surrendered your life to God, to Jesus." She spoke not with judgment, but with a profound sense of truth, as if stating a simple, undeniable fact. Michael felt a prickle of irritation, then a flash of anger. How dare she? He, a man of power, a man who commanded respect and fear, a slave. "And why would I surrender my life to Jesus?" he retorted, his voice sharp. "I have everything that I need." He gestured vaguely, encompassing his wealth, his influence, the very life he was trying to escape, yet still clung to as a symbol of his strength. "Really?" Sarah questioned, her eyebrow arching slightly. "You have everything that you need, and you'd kidnap a young woman?" Her words hung in the air, a simple, devastating truth that pierced through his carefully constructed facade. The question was a mirror, reflecting the ugliness of his actions, the hollowness of his supposed freedom. He was quiet for a moment, the weight of her words settling upon him, a discomfort he rarely allowed himself to feel. Then, as if a new thought had sparked within her, Sarah leaned forward, her eyes alight with a sudden inspiration. "Let me tell you this," she said, her voice gaining a new urgency. "Have you heard of the message of the gospel before?" Michael, still reeling from her previous question, could only nod, a silent acknowledgement of the familiar term, though its true meaning remained elusive to him. "Yes," he murmured, recalling fragmented verses, half-remembered sermons from a childhood he had long since abandoned. "Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life." He recited the words, a rote memory, devoid of understanding. "Very good," Sarah affirmed, a small smile gracing her lips. "So you know he says that no one gets to heaven except by him. You are making the most significant gamble of your life." She paused, letting the weight of her statement sink in. "If I am wrong, if all the Christians are wrong, then we live a good life and die, and then nothing. But if we are right, we lose nothing. But you lose everything, because he really is the only way and the truth and the life. There's no other way." Michael stood stunned, looking at her, the tray forgotten in his hand. He had heard the gospel before, in passing, in sermons he had dismissed as irrelevant. But never like this. Never framed as a gamble, a high-stakes wager with eternal consequences. He, a man who understood gambling better than anyone, was confronted with a gamble far greater than any World Cup final. He had never considered the stakes in such a way before. This profound wager, a challenge to his very understanding of risk and reward, resonated deep within his gambler's soul. He stood looking at her for a few minutes more, his mind racing, processing, before he finally nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the profound truth she had just laid bare. He turned, leaving the tray, and closed the door behind him, the silence of the room now filled with the echoes of her words, and the unsettling truth of his own captivity. Chapter 6. Michael lay in his opulent bed that night, the silk sheets a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within him. Sleep, usually a welcome escape, eluded him. He tossed and turned, Sarah's words ringing in his ears, echoing with an insistent truth he couldn't shake. This ultimate wager. It was a phrase that resonated with every fiber of his being, a concept he understood intimately, yet one he had never applied to his own eternal destiny. His life had been a constant, desperate struggle for freedom. His father, the ruthless patriarch of a sprawling drug cartel in Lagos, had cast a long, dark shadow over Michael's existence. He was sick and tired of the violence, the deception, the constant fear that permeated every aspect of his life. He had wanted to escape, always wanted to escape, to carve out a life free from the blood-stained legacy of his family. And his chosen path to liberation? Gambling. Specifically, sports gambling, with the World Cup as his grand stage. For the last 3 World Cups he had meticulously studied, analyzed, and bet, accruing a significant fortune. It was the fastest, most exhilarating way he knew to amass the kind of wealth that could buy him a new identity, a new life, far away from his father's reach. He had one more World Cup to go, one more big win, and then, he believed, he could finally escape. He had planned it all with meticulous detail. Every contingency accounted for, every risk calculated. And then Sarah had entered his life. A wrench thrown into the gears of his carefully constructed escape plan, talking about a gamble far greater than any he had ever conceived. He understood gambling. He had a soul for it, a keen intuition for risk and reward. He understood the stakes she had laid out with such quiet conviction. Believe in Jesus or lose everything. If she was right, if all the Christians were right, then he, Michael, stood to lose everything. Not just his earthly wealth, not just his freedom from his father, but his very soul, his eternal existence. The thought was terrifying, a cold dread that seeped into his bones. He had always played to win, to minimize losses. This was a gamble he could not afford to lose. The night wore on, each hour a battle between his ingrained cynicism and the undeniable truth in Sarah's eyes. He had seen fear, desperation, and anger in the eyes of his captives before, but never that radiant, unshakable joy, that profound sense of peace that seemed to emanate from her, even in captivity. It was a freedom he craved, a freedom his wealth and power could never buy. By dawn, a decision had solidified in his heart. He rose, a new resolve in his step, and went to Sarah's room, carrying her breakfast tray as usual. He set it down by her feet, his gaze meeting hers. There was no smirk on his face today, no mocking challenge, only a profound vulnerability. "I heard everything you said yesterday," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "and I do not want to lose this eternal wager." He paused, searching her eyes for guidance, for hope. How do I come to Jesus?" The words, once unthinkable, now tumbled out, a desperate plea from a soul weary of its own chains. Sarah's face softened, a gentle smile gracing her lips. She told him, simply and clearly, how to surrender his life, how to confess his sins, and how to accept the grace offered through Jesus. As she spoke, a warmth spread through Michael, a light dispelling the darkness that had enveloped him for so long. Together they knelt, and he repeated the sinner's prayer, each word a step towards a freedom he had never truly known. As soon as he finished, a profound relief flooded his heart, washing away years of guilt, fear, and despair. A deep sense of joy, pure and unadulterated, settled in his spirit. It was unlike any victory he had ever known, far surpassing the thrill of a winning bet or the satisfaction of a successful scheme. This was a peace that transcended circumstance, a freedom that defied his physical surroundings. He looked at Sarah, his eyes shining with newfound understanding. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much. I feel free, just like you do." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of a transformed life, a soul finally unshackled. The ultimate gamble had been placed, and Michael, for the first time, knew he had won. He had won everything. Chapter 7. The next morning dawned with a gentle knock on her door. Sarah, who had spent the night in prayer and a surprising measure of peace, sat up, her heart a little lighter than it had been days before. When Michael entered, he was different. The predatory glint in his eyes had softened, replaced by a quiet thoughtfulness. He wasn't carrying her usual breakfast tray. Instead, he held a stack of fresh towels, a bar of soap, and a new sponge. "Good morning," he said, his voice devoid of its usual edge, almost hesitant. "I thought you might appreciate a proper shower." He gestured towards a door outside her room that led to a bathroom. Her current small bathroom had only offered a new toothbrush and toothpaste, a meager concession to hygiene. The idea of hot water, of scrubbing away the grime and the lingering sense of violation, was a luxury she hadn't dared to dream of. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "That's a cool bathroom. Make use of it if you like," he added, a pleasant smile gracing his face, a smile that reached his eyes, for the first time since her abduction. Sarah took the offerings, a silent gratitude filling her heart. This was a small act of kindness, a ripple effect of the seed of truth she had planted in his heart. The shower felt wonderful, a cleansing balm for both body and soul. The hot water cascaded over her, washing away not just the physical dirt, but also the lingering stress, the fears, and the pains that had clung to her over the past few days. She emerged feeling refreshed, renewed, and strangely hopeful. After she had dressed in the fresh clothes Michael had provided earlier, she returned to her room and waited. A few minutes later, Michael knocked again. He entered, and with a gentle motion, beckoned her to follow him. "I want us to eat breakfast together at the table," he said, his tone suggesting a shared meal, not a captive's ration. He led her to a spacious dining room where a lavish breakfast was already laid out: crispy bacon, fluffy eggs, a pot of steaming tea, golden toast, and baked beans. It was a feast, a stark contrast to the solitary meals she had endured. After taking a few bites, a genuine smile spread across her face. "Did you make this by yourself, or did you have a cook make it for you?" she asked, a hint of playful curiosity in her voice. He chuckled, a warm, unfamiliar sound. "No, I can cook," he said, his smile widening. "You like it?" "Yes, it's very delicious," she affirmed, truly meaning it. The conversation halted, a comfortable silence settling between them. Sarah didn't know what to make of this new attitude. The man who had kidnapped her, the man who had held her captive, was now serving her breakfast and smiling. She didn't know how far she could push this newfound openness, how much of her captor's transformation was genuine. Michael, sensing her hesitancy, looked at her, his gaze earnest. "You know what? I'm a changed person now. Yesterday changed me," he confessed, his voice softer, more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "And I'm not going to hurt you or harm you. I promise you that. That was never my intention in the first place anyway, so you can relax." His words were a balm to her soul, a confirmation of the work God was doing in his heart. "When are you going to let me go?" she asked, her voice halting, but emboldened by his sincerity. The question hung in the air, a delicate balance between her desire for freedom and her growing understanding of his own internal struggle. "When you've done what it is that you came here to do," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "Just tell me who's going to win and I'll let you go." The old demand, but now delivered with a different weight, a different hope. "But God hasn't revealed it to me yet," she explained, her honesty unwavering. "What if I just lied to you?" she mused, testing the waters, a flicker of mischief in her eyes. Michael laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh. "You just thought about that? You could have lied to me 5 days ago. You could have lied to me since you got here. The fact that you haven't lied to me means that you will not lie to me." His insight surprised her. He saw her truth, her integrity, a quality he had likely rarely encountered in his world. She worried her lips and sighed deeply. She just couldn't bring herself to lie to him, not now, not after what they had shared. She shook her head. "Okay, I'll let you know as soon as I get the knowledge. But what if?" She stopped, a new fear creeping in. "What if what?" he prompted gently. "What if I don't get it this time around? What if I'm wrong? I say it and I'm wrong." The burden of his expectation, the weight of his desperate hope, was heavy. He shrugged his shoulders, a gesture of acceptance. Or what if an answer doesn't come at all till the end of the World Cup? He paused, then looked at her, his eyes holding a new, unexpected compassion. "Then I'll let you go. Whatever happens, you're going to go the day after the World Cup ends." It was a promise, a lifeline, a testament to the profound shift within him. He was no longer just a captor. He was a man grappling with a new reality, a new faith. Later that day, Michael was lying in bed, a rare moment of quiet reflection, when his phone rang. The caller ID flashed his father's name, and a knot of dread tightened in his stomach. The peace he had found that morning threatened to unravel. He answered, his voice carefully neutral. "Michael, I haven't seen you in over 1 week. Where have you been? Are you sick?" His father's voice was a low growl, laced with suspicion and thinly veiled authority. "No, Dad, I'm not sick. I've just been very busy," Michael lied, the old habits of deception kicking in instinctively. He hated the lies, but he knew the consequences of telling the truth to his father. "Really? Some of my men spotted your 2 guards back to their original post. Is everything okay? Why did you send them away?" The questions were sharp, probing, designed to expose any weakness, any deviation from the cartel's rigid code. Michael's heart pounded. His father knew too much, saw too much. "Oh, nothing. It's just a little flu, and I knew I wouldn't be going out much, so I didn't want to transmit anything to them. That's why I told them to go. But it's nothing to worry about. It's just a little flu, and I'm fully recovered now." The lies tasted bitter on his tongue, a stark reminder of the life he was trying to escape, the life he had just, hours ago, surrendered to God. "Okay, there's another job for you to do. This one is a big job, and I can't trust anybody but you to do this one. I want you to come see me tomorrow morning, okay?" The command was absolute, leaving no room for refusal. "Okay, Dad," he said, hanging up the phone, the receiver feeling heavy in his hand. Michael had a visceral reaction. He felt like throwing up. A big job that only he could be trusted with meant another huge run, another plunge back into the darkness he had just begun to crawl out of. Chapter 8. Michael knew he had to move, and move fast. His father's summons was not just a job offer. It was a leash being pulled tight. The only place his father's reach was limited was the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. Michael had 24 hours to set his plan in motion before the cartel began hunting him. He packed a small bag, his movements frantic yet purposeful. He went downstairs, loaded it into his car, and then returned for Sarah. She was on the couch, her attention fixed on the television, a momentary escape from her reality. Michael didn't explain. He couldn't. To tell her the truth was to put a target on her back. "Stand up," he commanded, his voice returning to a cold, professional edge. He pulled her up roughly, ignoring her squeal of protest. "What are you doing? I thought you said you had changed," she cried out, her eyes wide with a renewed terror. Michael remained silent, his heart aching at the betrayal in her voice, but he focused on the task. He tied her hands behind her back, the rope a bitter reminder of his old life. He bundled her into the trunk, then went into the car and pulled forward the back seats a crack to allow her some air. The drive to Abuja was a journey through a minefield. Michael knew the routes, the checkpoints, and which officers were on his father's payroll. He navigated the landscape with a desperate precision, using tips and familiar gestures to bypass scrutiny. By the time they reached the rented Airbnb in Abuja, Sarah was shivering, her spirit nearly broken by the journey in the dark. "I'm sorry," Michael whispered as he untied her in the quiet of the house. "I couldn't tell you. If we were stopped and you knew anything, they would have killed you." Sarah didn't answer. She was too weak, her faith being tested in a way she never imagined. Michael handed her a bag of fast food and pointed to her room. This is your room now. Eat and rest. Chapter 9. A week passed in the quiet tension of Abuja. The World Cup was days away, and still, Sarah had no revelation. Michael spent his days in a state of hypervigilance, keeping Sarah confined to the house for her own safety. He knew he couldn't stay in Nigeria. He needed a new identity, a way out. He visited a contact at the passport office to secure a travel document under a new name. But on the way back, the hair on the back of his neck stood up. He was being trailed. 2 men, professional and discreet, were following his every move. They weren't his father's men. They moved with a different kind of authority. He managed to shake them, but the sinking feeling in his stomach remained. He had been spotted. The walls were closing in. He got back home and ran into his bedroom to pack a small bag. Then he took a plastic bag and stuffed it with money. Tying the bag securely, he left his room and went to Sarah's room. "Listen to me," he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I have to leave the country. I'm being followed. This money, it's for you. If they come for me, I want you to go straight back to Lagos. Deposit this in a bank. Don't tell your family where it came from." Sarah looked at the money, then at him, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of fear and pity. That night, the silence was shattered by a heavy pounding on the door. "Open up, police!" Michael acted on instinct. He ran to Sarah's room, grabbed her and the bag of money and rushed her up to his bedroom. He grabbed a chair, gesturing for her to stand on it, and pushed her into the small attic space above the bathroom. "Stay here for 5 hours, he hissed. "If you don't hear from me, go to Lagos." He slammed the attic door shut, moved the chair, and went to face his fate. He ran downstairs and opened the front door. There were 3 officers, 2 men and a woman who seemed to be in charge. "Who is Michael Francis?" she asked. "I am Michael," he replied. "Michael, you're under arrest," she declared. "Who else is with you?" she continued. "Nobody," he said. They searched the house but found nothing. As they led Michael away, the female officer lingered. She noticed the way Michael's jaw tensed, the way his eyes flicked upward for a fraction of a second. It was a look of protection she knew all too well. She called her boss to let him know that she would be staying behind for a few more hours after the 2 other policemen left with Michael. Bookmark. Chapter 10. Hours later, Sarah emerged from the attic, her heart pounding. She followed Michael's instructions, making her way to the motor park and boarding a luxury bus to Lagos. She didn't realize that the female officer had followed her from the house and was sitting just a few rows behind her, watching her every move. In Lagos, Sarah deposited the money and returned home to a house filled with the screams and tears of her overjoyed family. The local police interrogated her, but she held her ground. "I don't know where they took me, and I was let go suddenly," she said, skirting the full story. "I don't know who they were." The officers were skeptical, sensing she was shielding someone, but they had no proof. Meanwhile, Michael's father had discovered the truth. The guards, broken by the lash of a whip, had confessed everything. Enraged, the kingpin ordered his men to kidnap Sarah again. He wanted answers, and he wondered what his son was doing all the way in Abuja under police custody. But the female officer from Abuja had already set her trap. Disguised as a street hawker, she set up her stand not too far from Sarah's house. A few days later, she watched as Sarah was bundled into a van again as she made her way out that morning. She ran and jumped onto a motorbike she had parked close by and followed the van at a discreet distance to the kingpin's lair. Then she called the local DPO for reinforcements. Michael's father eyed Sarah once over. The skinny girl stood trembling in front of him, utterly confused. "You are Sarah, aren't you?" The girl nodded, unable to speak. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. She shook her head no, and he could tell from the earnestness in her eyes that she was telling the truth. "Why did Michael kidnap you?" he asked. "Because he wanted me to pray for him," she replied. Michael's father was startled, although he tried not to show it. All of this mess for a religious experience? He couldn't understand it. "Is that all you have to say?" he said, nearly barking at the girl. "He took me to Abuja, and the police officers came to get him. I don't know anything else," she said, quaking with fear. Michael's father looked her over once again, disgust and rage filling him. "Take her back," he said abruptly to the men that had brought her. As the cartel members were about to drag Sarah away, the police stormed the building. The kingpin, the guards, and the entire operation were dismantled in a single night. In Abuja, Michael was released. The police had the big fish they wanted. Michael was no longer a person of interest. He was finally free. Chapter 11. Michael could have gone to France. He had the money, the new passport, and a friend waiting for him. But his heart was anchored in Lagos. He couldn't leave Sarah behind. He stood across from her house the next day, his heart in his throat. When she stepped out, her face lit up with a mixture of shock and relief. "I'm a new creation now, Sarah," he told her, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to start over, and I want to start over with you. I love you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. "I love you too, Michael. When you texted me to come outside, my heart jumped for joy." But she hesitated. "What will we tell my parents?" "We tell them the truth," he replied. "They will never accept our relationship," she blurted. "Listen," he said gently, "our love is worth fighting for. I will come back tomorrow and we will talk to your parents then." Their joy was short-lived when they faced her parents. Michael insisted on telling them the truth, refusing to build their future on a foundation of lies. Her parents were horrified, seeing only the criminal he had been. "He is a kidnapper, a criminal," her father roared. A knock at the door interrupted the tension. Michael opened it to find the female officer from Abuja. He braced himself for more charges, but she looked at him with a soft, tearful smile. "I am your mother, Michael," she said, her voice trembling. She explained that she had fled his father decades ago, joining the Secret Service to stay hidden and fight the darkness from within. She had followed Michael in Abuja not to arrest him, but to find him. "I saw the way you protected her. With a slight change in your facial expression, the same look on your dad's face when he protected his men," she told him. "I knew then you were truly mine. Sarah and I have been communicating since your father was arrested. She begged me to come today to help you. I was afraid of your rejection since I abandoned you many years ago, but I needed to be here today to show you that I love you and I support you. Your father had threatened me that if I ever left with you, he would find me and kill both you and I. So I left you behind to protect your life. I am so sorry," she said. Michael embraced her, then ushered her in, his mind still reeling with the implication of all he had just heard, and he had no words yet to convey how he truly felt. His mother entered the living room, and she was welcomed by Sarah's parents and asked to join them. Her testimony and the reveal of her own past finally broke the ice with Sarah's parents. Her father sighed, quoting a Yoruba proverb, "Out of a black pot comes white corn pap." Then her parents gave them their blessings. As they sat together later, Michael turned to Sarah with a playful glint in his eye. "So, do you know who's going to win the World Cup now?" Sarah laughed, a bright, beautiful sound. "Yes, I do." "Well, tell me." She shook her head, a twinkle in her eye. "I can't, because then I'd be condoning gambling, wouldn't I?" They both burst out laughing, their hearts overflowing with joy and gratitude for their new lives. The end.